The great French philosopher Voltaire once stated, "One doesn't have to be crazy about the Chinese to see that their empire is the best the world has ever seen." That was pretty much the view of everyone in Europe for a lot of the 18th and 19th centuries. Liberals were interested in the merit-based system of the Chinese civil service, and Asian themes started to show up in the work of a whole group of painters. It's easy to see why Imperial China seemed like a perfect place to live. It had tea, hanfu, Chinese-style kimonos, and beautiful buildings. But did you know that the exact translation of utopia is no place, which makes fun of the idea of a perfect society? The Europeans of the Enlightenment should have paid attention to what they learned in traditional school. Before the 20th century flood, China was not a calm place. In fact, it was so badly broken that it would have given H.P. Lovecraft nightmares. The Taiping Rebellion killed a lot of people. How many people have died in the greatest war in history? The correct answer is World War II. No other war has even come close to killing between 60 million and 85 million people. That is, unless you include the highest figures for the Taiping Rebellion. Wikipedia says that the insurrection began in southern China in 1850 and went for 14 years, destroying more than 600 cities completely. It's hard to get exact numbers, but the lowest number of deaths is thought to be around 20 million. The tallest? There are 100 million dead via medium. To be clear, the number 100 million is most likely a huge guess. A lot of scholars say that only 20 to 30 million people died. That only number is more than the number of people who died in World War I, about 8.5 million, the Napoleonic Wars, between 1.2 and 2.5 million, and the American Civil War, less than a million, put together. At that time and place, there were no guns like those we use today. A lot of people were killed by hand during the Taiping Rebellion. Still, the Third Battle of Nanjing in the last days of the rebellion was probably the biggest battle in history until World War I. What did the Taiping Rebellion are all about? That all changed when a teacher in Qing, China named Hong Xiuquan said he was the son of God and tried to set up a Christian theocracy. You know, like you do. A European superpower turned the Chinese into drug addicts. People interested in the Opium Wars probably thought it was a great idea at the time, but now they all feel really bad about what they did. From 1839 to 1842, and again from 1856 to 1860, there were two Opium Wars. The first one was between the British and then the French against the powerful Qing Imperial China. You only have to look at the names of the wars to know what they were really about. At the time, the Europeans said they were fighting for things like free trade and mission safety. Britain fought for the right to send a lot of drugs to China that would make people addicted. The information comes from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. In the 1800s, Britain was a leader in the opium trade. They thought it would be profitable to sell all of their sweet drugs to China, which had not yet been explored. So they started to create China's own opioid problem in the 1800s, and when the Qing government spoke out against it, they went to war. The Qing had to go through so much death in the First Opium War that it helped start the Taiping Rebellion. Good job, Britain. It also caused a huge rise in addiction. By the 1850s, so many people in China were hooked on opium that it was a threat to the whole kingdom. In the end, it did. In the early 1900s, the Opium Wars were the main cause of the fall of Royal China. An exam out of Kafka. One thing that Europeans really liked about Imperial China was the test for civil service. At that time, getting into the government in Europe based on ability wasn't really a thing, but China let anyone with brains and talent join. But while that must have seemed like paradise to a Frenchman living under Louis XVI, the real test to get into Imperial China's civil service was meant to be very hard. The BBC show In Our Time talks about a pass rate of less than 1%. and how you can only take the test again every few years. A lot of men went crazy during the process because so many dreams were tied to passing. You and everyone in your town could be proud if you passed the entrance exam. A lot of the time, whole neighborhoods worked together to get the money one of their members needed to take the test. The chosen ones had to deal with a lot of mental stress because of this. They could spend their whole lives editing, only to have death himself mark their work with the final F. Chinese literature from that time is full of characters who are losing weight and going crazy because of the stress of the test. Of course, the whole thing was also utterly pointless. Britannica says that by the Ming Dynasty, the test was no longer based on merit, but on who could quote Confucius correctly and in a certain way. But it wasn't completely wiped out until 1905, which was right before the end of the imperial system. Famine's a serious business in China. You've heard of the Donner Party, which is America's most famous story about people who ate each other when they were hungry. Wait, that wasn't bad for those cold pioneers. What happened to the people of Anqing in 1861 was much worse. During the height of the Taiping Rebellion, Qing troops surrounded the city of Anqing, which was held by the rebels, and cut off its supplies. The Qing army broke through the walls after a hard 2-year battle. They could have used what they found inside to make a dozen scary movies. The history blog at Cambridge University says that the Qing didn't just find proof that the hungry people had turned to eating. They found proof that a whole economy had grown up around the buying and eating of human flesh. Records were found that showed how much a dead body was worth on the market. A kilogram of human meat sold for 50 pence, which is about 2.2 pounds for 0.64 cents in US dollars. We don't have any first-hand reports of any of this, though. In his book, Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom, China, the West, and the Epic Story of the Taiping Civil War, Stephen R. Platt writes about how the Qing ended the siege of Anqing by killing all 8,000 soldiers in the company after they gave up. More than 10,000 women were taken as slaves by Qing troops, and only a few children may have been spared, according to Cambridge. The Ming Dynasty falls with one heck of a crash. Some people say that all great political careers come to an end. In China, before modern times, they were doomed to fail and cause uprisings, rebellions, and the deaths of everyone you cared about. Look at how the Ming Dynasty ended. The people who built the Great Wall as we know it today were called the Ming and ruled from 1368 to 1644. When they finally lost power, they landed with a huge crash. ThoughtCo has all the information. In the middle of the 17th century, a terrible famine and a weak government made it possible for the peasants to rise up under the flag of the self-proclaimed Shun Emperor. In a bloody uprising, the Shun Emperor took over Beijing. The last Ming Emperor chose to hang himself in the Imperial Gardens rather than be caught by the Shun Emperor. But the remaining Ming supporters didn't want to give in to the new Shun dynasty. Instead, they chose to burn everything down. So, a general named Wu rode north to the Manchus, who used to be the Ming's worst enemies. Then he told the Manchu Qing that they could have China if they got rid of the Shun. They did destroy. The Qing invasion of China was a terrible end-of-the-world war. Based on what Business Insider says, about 25 million people are thought to have died. The Shun were dead, the Ming were a thing of the past, and the Qing were in charge for good. The coup that killed millions. Oh boy, another uprising in China that killed a lot of people. In ancient China, did they ever have a rebellion that wasn't so bad? Most likely not, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't learn about the Anlushan uprising. This time, it was the Tang Empire that was targeted. The Tang family led China's cultural golden age from 618 AD to the present day. That didn't mean they were always well liked, though. In the early 700s and 50s, armies from other countries were pressing in on all sides of the kingdom. Xuanzong, the Tang ruler, wanted to stay in power so badly that he gave Anlushan, his best general and a guy who looked sketchy, all the men and weapons he could need. After seeing the huge army he now led, An Lushan thought he might be able to be a better master than old Xuanzong. Thought Ko has all the information. An Lushan rose up in 755. He took over both Tang cities and called himself Emperor of Yan. Plus, according to BBC's In Our Time, he killed a lot of people. But that's just politics, right? An was sad that his winning streak didn't last. In 761, his own son killed him, and then his son killed him. This caused chaos in the Yan Empire and let the Tang take control again in a bloody war. But the Tang also lost because of the fight. They were so weak after the uprising that they never fully recovered, and in 907 they fell apart. China's other Great Famine. The 1900s were a terrible time to live in China. The Guardian says that between 1958 and 1961, the worst famine ever recorded killed between 36 million and 45 million people. It was called the Great Famine for a reason. The 3 years of difficulties were probably the worst thing that happened during the Mao era. But not many people in the West know that it wasn't just one case. 80 years ago, Imperial China was going through what is now known as the Great Northern Famine. It was almost as scary as its more well-known cousin. The Great Famine was like World War II, and the North China Famine was like World War I. It was not as dangerous, but it still caused a huge amount of suffering that had never been seen before in human history. Things began formally in 1876, when a drought hit the northern provinces and made life very hard for many people. But they really began much earlier. Famine was preceded by periods of colonial conflict with Japan, England, and Russia, according to the World Peace Foundation. There were also many internal conflicts, which meant that the government had to allocate scarce resources to the construction of coastal defenses rather than famine relief. The 3-year famine that killed between 9 and 13 million people was made worse by this waste of resources. Maybe not as bad as Mao's hunger, but still, geez. Death by 1,000 cuts ended way later than you'll feel comfortable with. One thing that everyone in the West knows about old China is the death by 1,000 cuts, even though it was only used by the worst criminals and not very often. The thought of having body parts cut off until you die is so scary that you could put lines through it, call it a ghost train, and charge people to get on it. It was first done in the 10th century and is on the same level of memory for us as Europe's ancient tortures. This is mostly because we are thankful that we live in a different time. Now, here's the deal. If you want to know the real name of this technique, it's called Lingqi. It sounds like something Vlad the Impaler would enjoy, but it didn't stop being popular until more recently. How near? Look at the year 1905. Do you want to read about Wang Weiqin's death in 1904? If so, the Harvard University Press book, Death by 1,000 Cuts, describes the process of Lingqi in great detail. He was found guilty of killing 12 people in the same family, put on a parade through Beijing, and then cut up and killed in a veggie market. Though it was horrible, his death wasn't the last Lingqi to be put to death. That honor went to a Manchu servant, Fuzuli, who was killed on April 9th, 1905, and his body was cut up. The Great Wall of Death. Oh, the Great Wall of China. An important building that most of us only know about because of false beliefs that it can be seen from space or is only one wall. Like, did you know that the current shape is only from the Ming Dynasty? Oh, we talked about it somewhere else in this piece, right? Okay, that's fine. So, how about this interesting fact? The first routes of the Great Wall of China were not made of mud, clay, or bricks. They were made of pain and death. About 400,000 workers were killed while constructing the wall, and many of their bodies were found inside the wall itself. That's a lot of dead bodies, and it's worse when you know what happened. When the wall was first built in 221 BC, there weren't many people who were willing to wait around for orders to build a 3,000-mile wall. People from the common people were forced by the Qin emperor to do our hard work. In Our Time on the BBC talks about how farmers from all over China were picked up, dragged to the wall and told to do their thing. Modern Chinese poems don't talk about the building as an engineering feat, but as a national sorrow on par with a great famine or war. It takes away from the romance of those tourist pictures, doesn't it? We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.